Hi class. In this chapter, we are going to take a look at where corporations get their money and how much do they pay for that money. So we're going to start by calling that money, we're going to call it the capital, right? This is the money that businesses have and they convert into a business so the business can make even more money, right? And that money may come from three different sources. It may come from what we call debt. This is all very high level, at first. Preferred stock, we'll have to take a, we'll pause then, in just a moment. And common equity, these are just stocks, okay? Shares of stock. Debt could be bonds, could be loans, could be anything that has the form of debt, right? So debt is an obligation. How do I know what is debt? Well, if there's an obligation to make payment, that's debt. And it might, it may be short term or it may be long term, less than 1 year, oops, less than 1 year or more than 1 year, okay? But either way, debt means an obligation. It represents an obligation. Then there is equity. Yeah, I'm skipping over preferred stock. I'll go back to preferred stock. Then there is common equity. These are stocks. Stocks. There's nothing new about them, right? You've seen them. You have already done some valuation of that on them, right? These are the shares that companies sell in the stock market that we can purchase, and if there are any dividends, we get to collect those dividends. That's common equity, and it may come from retained earnings. That money may come from new common stock. Not important, but not important at this point. And then there is preferred stock. Preferred stock is, well, it's in the middle of the two, right? Well, that's for a good reason, because it shares some of the peculiarities of debt and it shares some of the characteristics of equity. It's somewhere in between. Um, does it represent an obligation? Because I know what I said before. If it's an obligation, then it's debt. Well, it is only an obligation if other things happen. That is why it's not a perfect 100% obligation. So preferred stock, those that hold preferred stock, let's say that they're first to get paid if the company chooses to pay dividends. So if a company declares a profit and decides to pay dividends, it first have to pay the preferred stockholders a fixed dividend. It cannot go above certain levels. So let's just say that the preferred stock is $2 dividend. Well, if the company declares a profit and it wants to pay dividends, it will first have to pay the $2 preferred stock dividend before it can pay the common equity. Not all companies have preferred stock. You and I don't have access to it. It's a very special financial tool, so don't think too much of it. But that's what it is. It's somewhere in between common equity and debt. It shares characteristics of both. Okay? And we move right into the Wacc formula. Wacc, weighted average cost of capital. Okay, so what are we doing here? What are we trying to do? Well, let me just get just a clear slide here, just so I can write. Let me get this out of the way. All right. So we've seen when you were computing, when you were doing valuation of bonds, you used RD for bonds. That's the required return on debt. You used RS, the required return on stocks, for equity, for stocks. Okay? But companies get money from both sources and prefer stock, well, let's just throw in there. RP will be preferred stock. Okay? Companies get money from all of these three sources. So the question is, how much are they paying on average? right? Let me just give you an example. Let's say that you are paying on your debt. There's a company, company A, is paying on his debt, is paying, let's say, 8%. And let's just say that this company has all of its financing based on debt. So it has 0% equity. It's 100% finance on debt. Well, if I ask you then what is the average cost of his debt? Well, that's easy. If they only have one source, 100%, it is 8%, then it is 8%. That's easy, right? Well, what if company B has debt at, let's say it's 8%, but it has 50% in debt, but it also has some stock that it pays, let's say, are we doing the easy numbers here? Let me do an easy number. 6%, and he has, therefore, right, if he has 50% in debt, then he must have the other 50% in equity, unless they have preferred stock. Let's not make it that complicated yet. Then if I ask you, well, what is this firm paying on average for its capital? Well, that's easy, right? Because if it's 50-50, you're just going to find the average of the two, right? And you're going to say, well, then the average is 7%. If I ask you how you calculated that, you're probably going to say, well, I took 8 plus 6 and I divided it by 2. And that would be correct. It's just, it's not good enough because things are going to get more complicated. So the actual proper calculation, it would be, you would take 8% and you will multiply it by 50%, and then you would add 6% times 50%. So you're taking half of one and half of the other. The answer is still 7%. Okay? So this is what we're doing. We're trying to find what is the average cost of all the capital this, a particular firm has. So let's go back to this formula. Now, this formula is pretty scary, but it's exactly the same as this formula down here. I just made it, I simplify. Now we're going to add a couple of components. Now you see here WD and WDR and RD. Well, this is the required return of debt, and this is the weight of the debt. In my example here, in the first example, it was 100%. In the second example, it was 50%. Okay, simple. I'm going to jump and then I'm going to come back, okay? Then we have the weight for the preferred stock. If there is some preferred stock, you're going to put the weight there. If there's no preferred stock, you will put a 0%, which will wipe out this entire, this group of variables. And you will put the required return on the preferred stock. And then finally, common equity. What is the weight? That means what is the percentage of equity that you have? And what is the required return on that equity? Now, let's look at this one, right? What is this doing here? Well, if you recall from previous chapters, kind of like the accounting chapters, debt creates a tax shield because debt is a deductible on your taxes. So in reality, when you're paying debt, when you're paying your debt, you're not paying, let's say that you're paying 8% on a loan. Technically, you're not paying 8% because you're gonna get a deduction on your taxes. So your effective rate is gonna be below 8%. Anyone that had a mortgage back in the day before they changed the tax code will know exactly what I'm talking about. So what we do is we need to adjust debt by the taxes, by the tax bracket that company is in, represented by T. So by doing this, we're going to reduce the RD by the amount of money the company is going to get back in its taxes when it does its tax returns. Okay, so it's an adjustment. Lucky for us, the others don't have to be adjusted. Let's say we have an example here, and we'll make it a little bit easier. It's a long example. Now, it's all the more complicated stuff that I don't want to talk about it right now. All right, here's an example. I'm skipping a lot of steps, okay? But I'm just getting to the point where we get to calculate Wacc. So again, the formula is the weight of the debt, the portion of the debt, times the required return for debt, times 1 minus the tax rate, plus the weight of preferred times the required return on preferred, plus the weight on equity times the required return on the equity. So let me write here so you guys see where this came from. So this company has, let me just, it's using, okay, all right. It's 30%, 10%, and equity stock is 40%, right? Oop, no, 60%, sorry, 60%. I'm glad I was going to do the check. 60% for a total of 100%. 100%. So it has 30% in debt, 10% in preferred stock, 60% of the money is invested. Comes from equity. Okay, and the required returns are for debt is 10%. For preferred stock is 9%. As you can see, I'm doing this problem backwards. I can see the answer. I'm just trying to get the components out so you can see them. And the required return on equity is 14%. Okay. In addition, they are telling us that the tax rate is 25%. Okay. And then you just build a formula the ways up here. I'm not gonna rewrite it, but it's pretty clear, right? The weight of the debt times the required return on the debt times 1 minus the tax rate, that will be 0.75, plus the weight of the preferred stock times the required return on the preferred stock plus the portion of the common stock times the required return on the stock. You do the math and you get 11.6. So this is your average cost of capital. Better yet, is the weighted average cost of capital, right? Because it's weighted by the different amounts. So why does this matter? Oh, it matters because it's great data to have, but it also matters because in the next chapter we are going to use Wacc so we can evaluate projects. So far in this course we have evaluated bonds, we've done valuation for stocks, multiple, in a couple of different ways, well, actually more than 2 ways. But how about a project? Just a project within a firm, right? So let me just give you an example of what I mean. It's kind of like a preview to the next chapter, okay? Let's say that you have a project, an internal project. You are the manager of a company and you have a project. Let's call it A, okay? And I'm just gonna do it some very simple numbers here, because I don't, we'll cover this in the next chapter in depth, okay? But let's say that we have a project and the project is going to have a 9% return, okay, on your investment. It's going to have a 9% return. And you're trying to decide whether or not to approve it, whether or not to move forward with this project. Should we do it or not do it? Someone asks you, like, should we do it or not do it? Like, how will you know? You don't know. And if you do, then we got a problem because you're missing something. Um, if you're looking at it, a 9% return just by itself with no other data given to you means nothing. Nothing to me at all. Is it profitable? I don't know. I need more information. Well, what information do I need? Oh, I need to know how much is it going to cost me to raise the money to get into this project. Let's say that your WACC is 7%. So it's going to cost you 7% to finance this project, but you're going to make 9% in return. Then you will effectively have a profit of 2% because you're going to pay 7% for the financing, but you're going to get 9% in return for the project. So you get to keep the 2%. So yes, you are going to make a 2% profit. Is that good? Well, yes, it is, because it is a positive profit. So should you do it? All the things being equal, yes, you should do it because you're going to make a 2% profit. How about company B has the exact same return because they're looking at the exact same project, exactly the same project. But for whatever reason, their WACC is, let's say, 10%. They cannot raise capital as cheaply as A. Should they go ahead and complete this project? No, the answer is no. Because they're going to get a 9% return, but it's going to cost them 10% to finance the project. So they're going to lose 1%. So no, they should not do it. Okay. So this is, again, this is a little bit of a preview into the next chapter. Thank you.